Hello everyone, my name is ABA Pickle and welcome back to Warhammer 40k Darktide. Today we're going to be talking about the veteran sharpshooter melee weapons in Darktide. We're going to be putting them in a tier list in two categories, one of them being how effective I think they could be at higher end, and the second category will be how fun I think the weapon can be regardless of what difficulty you're playing at. So, we are going to be not talking about any of the Ogryn melee weapons, any of the Zealot melee weapons, any of the Psyker melee weapons. None of those are taken into effect, and we're not even comparing these things on how they work on other classes. So if something is rated low, it is possible that it's just not as good on the Sharpshooter class as it is on the Zealot, the Psyker class in general. So, and if there is a weapon missing, it's just not on the Sharpshooter. With all that aside, we're going to get into it. And we're going to start off with the good old Power Sword. This thing is the weapon that everyone here is probably here to talk about because it is the best thing in Darktide. It is the best melee weapon, hands down. Even after the nerf, where it doesn't cleave infinitely, it cleaves to, I think it's like 12 maybe. I'll put up the picture of how many it cleaves through in like the little patch notes of what it got nerfed to. It wasn't a big nerf, and honestly, it really didn't do much. This thing is still an absolute beast. Say it right now, this thing is the best melee weapon in the game. If you are going into the highest tier difficulties of Heresy and Damnation, this is your best option for success. It cleaves through enemies really well. It gets through Carapace armor when you charge it up. It absolutely eviscerates everything in your path. This is the weapon to go with for the highest tier of gameplay, in my opinion. This thing is my baby. I love it to death, and it feels great to use. Every single time you charge it up, you get 3 swipes that cleave through everything and cut them in half. You get to play good old Butcher Simulator, and it's amazing. Moving on to the next weapon, we're going to be going with the Chainsword. This is another very good weapon. If you can't find a good power sword, but you have a good chainsword, you're in luck, because it's also a great weapon. Another S tier. This thing is amazing. When you rev it up, it will get through that Carapace armor. Now, it won't cleave when you rev it up like that, like the Power Sword does when you rev it up. So I think that the Power Sword is the best weapon over the Chainsword for that reason. And then also the Chainsword, when you rev it up and hit something, it exposes you for a couple seconds longer than the Power Sword that just cuts through cleanly. So I think that, if anything, the Power Sword is number 1, Chainsword would be number 2, in my opinion, for viability in endgame. The next weapon we're going to be continuing with all the swords is the Devil's Claw Combat Sword. This thing does not great damage. It does cleave through everything though, which is great. It does not get through Carapace armor, but the one redeeming factor is it has a parry. So the parry, as you can see against this Rager there, will absolutely nullify a lot of its damage if you use it correctly. It does take up some stamina when you do that parry ability successfully, so it is important to know that. Still, the damage isn't great, which is why it's getting a B tier. The parry is what's keeping it out of the C tier. And if you can get a good build, maybe I could see it being in the A tier, but honestly, I will not bring this thing into Heresy or Damnation. It's not my weapon. I'm not a huge fan of it, especially when comparing it to the other 2 swords. Moving on to the next weapon, we have the Combat Blade. The Combat Blade is really, really good. If you are not on a Sharpshooter. So for the Sharpshooter, it's very close range. It has an alternate fire that punches, and then you can follow that up with another hit that is an automatic crit, which is cool. It is pretty fun, though, with that. Still, the damage that when it cleaves through, it might be a faster hitting weapon. Leaves something to be a little bit desired, but not horrible. I'm going to put it at a B tier just because it's really fun to use, especially watching him flip it around like he does, and it feels like he's a master carving up an enemy. So it's keeping it at a B tier, out of that C tier range, because I think that it does have potential with maybe a buff or 2 to be viable in the higher tiers of play, or the Sharpshooter. Moving on to the next, we have the Shovel. It's an S tier bit. No, I'm kidding. In all realism, This thing has potential to be good depending on your role. I'm going to put it in the C tier because when comparing it to other weapons that don't cleave, it might be fast, but there are weapons that are faster. It might deal decent damage, but there are weapons that deal more. It's that awkward middle child that honestly feels like it's a starting weapon and has potential to be good with buffs and stuff like that, but I'm not a huge fan of it. It doesn't sell on me. So I don't think there's anything else to say about it. Memes are funny, but on Heresy and Damnation, this thing struggles. So moving on to the next weapon, we're going to be talking about the thing that does more damage, the Combat Axe. This thing is pretty decent. Some of the variants deal really good damage. I'm going to put it at a B tier unless you have Brutal Momentum. If you have Brutal Momentum, which is a blessing that says on a critical weak spot kill, so when you chop someone in the face, it ignores critical hit mass. That means you get a cleave. With this heavy weapon, if you have Brutal Momentum, put this thing at an A tier. This thing is a great weapon. It'll do great damage to hordes. It does good damage to specialists. In general, it's decent. The reason I don't have it higher is it's a little clunky for me. I don't like heavier weapons. That's a personal preference. Talking about axes, we're gonna be ending on two of them here. First off, we have the Tactical Axe here, a faster variant of the Combat Axe, kind of like the Combat Blade, but without the cleave. And I feel like, once again, this thing is a B tier, just like the Combat Axe. But if you have Brutal Momentum on, it's low A tier, high B tier. The thing can be pretty fun to use, especially when you can cleave. It attacks so fast and does good damage, better damage than the Combat Blade, but not quite as much as a sword. But it will take out your basic enemies, and it's better for hordes than specialists, which you as a sharpshooter, your job isn't hordes typically. You typically want to rely on your team, but it gives you something to at least fight them. Because you're able to get that weak spot kill, hit someone in the face, cleave through things, keep it at that head level, and if you can chop off another head, it refreshes that timer. You can keep on attacking people in the face and deal some good damage to a wide crowd of people. But the damage still leaves something to be quite desired. Moving on, we have the good old Chain Axe, the final weapon of the veteran sharpshooter. So this thing, you rev it up, it gets through carapace armor. It snags on enemies though, so it does not cleave, and I have not been able to find one with Brutal Momentum. Let me know if it can even drop with that. If so, I think it would be a lot better, but still, not that bad. Does good damage to specialists and getting through that carapace armor, especially with those ogrins with carapace armor, the crushers, is really good. It can melt those ogrins, especially if you get a heavy rev up on them. It can almost one-shot them on some difficulties. So Chain Axe is pretty good overall. Now, going back to the fun factor, which I forgot to do, but we're going to go over right now, just a little fast little lightning round. Power Sword and Chain Sword are at a 5 out of 5. I think the Chain Axe, for me personally, fun factor is like a 2 or 3 out of 5. I'm not big on things that don't cleave, but I definitely recognize the damage it does and how effective it can be. Devil Claw Sword for me is going to still also be at a 3 out of 5 because though its damage isn't that great, it does cleave through things, even if it doesn't get through that armor, but it also has that parry, and I love parries. I love it so much. The Combat Blade for me, the little knife, is a 5 out of 5 for the fun factor. Even though I wouldn't take it into higher tier play, when I'm grinding, doing my daily challenges, I love taking this thing with a light weapon, much like a comment I got on a previous video, which I'm going to put up right here. I love taking this thing and having a light build and feeling so light on my feet, fluid. The way he just flips the knife around is so satisfying to watch. Honestly, it's one of my favorite weapons to use, even though it's not that great at higher tier. When it comes to the Combat Axe, I'm going to put this thing at a 2 out of 5 for the fun factor. I don't know, it just is so bulky and it feels like I'm just bopping things with a hammer, which is funny for memes, but at the same time, I'm not big with clunky weapons. I didn't give the bolter an S tier on my gun tier list because of that fact. I'm just not happy with them. I like things that are more fluid, much like the swords and the combat blade and so on and so forth. Fun factor for the tactical axe, I'm gonna actually say that it's a little bit higher. It's probably gonna be like a 3 to 4 out of 5 for the fun factor, just because of how fast it attacks. It can be kind of fun to watch him just like chop, 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 like a good old butcher or a chef cutting up tomatoes with an axe. Doesn't make sense in my head, but we're gonna move on from that. Then for the final weapon for the fun factor is the shovel, which I'm gonna put at an 1,000 out of 10, because honestly, using the shovel in this game and then just being a little memer with it is really fun to talk about. You know, just the deathcore of Krieg intensifies. So, but overall, those are my opinions on the Warhammer 40k veteran sharpshooter melee weapons and what I think is best and worst. Let me know if you agree with my list or do not agree down in the comments below. My name is AB Pickle. Thank you guys so much for watching. Remember to like if you enjoyed it, dislike if you didn't, comment down below your thoughts and opinions, and subscribe if you want to see more. And I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!